It's been just under 2 weeks since Paul Whelan and others returned to the United States from Russia after a historic multi-nation prisoner swap. Whelan's attorney Ryan Fayhee is here with me now in our D.C. studio to discuss the Marine veterans' release and much more. Great to see you. Thank you for being here. We appreciate it. First of all, how is Paul doing?
Paul's doing great, and at least as well as can be expected. Mm-hmm. He's proud of what his country's done for him in bringing him home. He's reacclimating, reconnecting with his family and some old Marine friends, and making sure that his health is in good order before he returns to the great state of Michigan.
So he's still in Texas?
He's still in Texas.
Okay. So he was imprisoned for more than 5 years, and we know from news reports that occasionally reporters would hear from him. How often were you and his family in touch?
Well, his family and him, in particular his mother and father, and he were in touch almost every day. He did have the opportunity over the years to speak with him. Once he was out of Lefortovo and out into this miserable labor camp, they did have that opportunity to connect. I only connected with him actually one time.
Really?
By happenstance alongside the Special Envoy for Hostage Affairs, Roger Carstens, who I happened to be sitting next to when Paul called. That was really by design, because I had been making my way around the city alongside his family and advocating for Paul. I had a lot of sensitive information and how I thought the case may be resolved, and I really didn't want to share that with the Russians over a phone call with Paul.
Because they would have been monitoring it, obviously.
Of course.
Yeah. Now, Roger Carstens, obviously one of those U.S. officials you would have been dealing with on a regular basis. How frequently would you have been in touch with other U.S. officials on this case? Is it daily? Is it weekly? Is it every few weeks?
Well, it was a long road, 5.5 years. So this is a small city, and it was important to work this on every angle, everything from the halls of the U.S. Congress alongside his family. But ultimately, the State Department, the contact was very frequent. There's a lot of family support in Roger Carstens' office, something that's had a tremendous amount of growth over the course of the past 5.5 years. But ultimately, there was a small group of people that helped to resolve the case. The president was invested, for sure. He'd met with Elizabeth, I think, 2 times in the Oval Office to great effect.
His sister, yeah.
Paul's sister, Elizabeth, that's right. And then the National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, took this as a point of personal intention and pride to get it resolved. And the interactions with the family in particular were very frequent.
Now, you have dealt with other cases of wrongfully detained Americans in the past. 2 questions off that. First, how does an attorney like you fall into these kinds of cases? Like, is that a specialty that you guys develop, or does it just kind of happen? And how do you distinguish the difference in Paul's case versus the many others around the world, especially people who've been held for several years, whether it's in Russia or in other countries?
So I was a longtime Department of Justice national security prosecutor, and in search of a pro bono case that would align with my experience and my knowledge of Washington, D.C. And so when Paul was first arrested, there were a lot of questions around the circumstances of his arrest and whether he was a spy and a variety of other, I thought, quite unfair questions. I thought the only thing I had seen was that an American citizen was detained in Russia, and it seemed to be unfairly. And so ultimately, this was the first of many cases that would come. I was very happy to have found a pro bono project that was very meaningful to me. And I learned a ton from this family and making our way around town. And one of the silver linings of Paul's case is that it's positioned me and many others to be better advocates on behalf of families of those that have been taken hostage and being wrongfully detained.
So what distinguished his case then versus all these others? The fact that he's a Marine, the fact that it was 5.5 years?
There's 2 things that I think distinguish Paul's case. I mean, first and foremost, Russia is unique in today's environment, and their willingness to engage in just transparent hostage diplomacy. It was thinly veiled and obvious from the get-go that that's, what was at play here. And obviously we saw, all of us, the American public saw Paul being exploited and re-exploited time and again as people came home, really while he stayed. That was very intentional. So that was first. Second, over the course of that 5.5 years, the hostage enterprise, as I'll call it, here in Washington, D.C., has really grown and evolved in very meaningful and I would argue helpful ways. There's more work to be done, but a lot of lessons learned from Paul's case. And my hope is, moving forward, that the U.S. government's going to put an intentional focus on deterrence and to developing a system of deterrence.
Well, that was my next question, is sort of what should be done to, I mean, the president, for example, says, well, don't go to these dangerous countries if the State Department's issuing travel warnings. That's only going to work sometimes. I mean, what else can be done to deter people from ending up in these situations?
So there is some low-hanging fruit. It's a very, very challenging problem, but there is some low-hanging fruit. First, education. Certainly educating the public in every opportunity possible around the dangers of traveling to Russia, Iran, Syria, and so on. So education for sure. Second, the State Department really needs to impose some escalation procedures. Oftentimes, as is Paul's case, when someone's arrested in that first 24 to 48 hours, there are key indicators that it's a wrongful detention situation. That's got to be escalated up to the very highest levels of the U.S. government to try to resolve it in those early days so that we don't wait months and months and months to find ways to make an American citizen into a pawn. So that's key. And then ultimately, I think there has to be a broader multilateral strategy. I was a sanctions prosecutor. I'm now a sanctions practitioner in private practice. And so those tools that are available to further the U.S. foreign policy and national security interests need to be applied, in my view, in this context. But the U.S. can't do it alone. They've got to bring the broader community around to make sure that the costs of detaining an American citizen far outweigh the value of holding on to them.
A lot of work to be done, but a lot of work done and lessons learned, as you said, from this case. Ryan Fayhee, great to meet you. Thanks for being here, and our best to Paul and his family.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.